The first thing I saw that morning was the flashing blue light reflecting off the side of my old pickup. At first I thought there had been an accident on the street. Then, I stepped onto the porch and saw a police cruiser near my gravel pad, a tow truck idling behind it, and Carol Whitman from the HOA standing beside my truck with one hand on her hip. My pickup was not blocking a driveway. It was not parked on the street. It was not on HOA common area near a sidewalk or in front of anyone's mailbox. It was parked on my private land. Carol did not know it yet, but by calling the police, she had put her own overreach on record. That little gravel pad beside my shed had been mine since the day I bought the property. It was listed in my closing documents, shown on the county map, and separated from the HOA boundary by a strip of grass most people never noticed. But Carol noticed everything she wanted to control, and that morning she had decided my truck was ugly enough to become a police matter. She had already taped a red violation notice to the windshield. The words commercial vehicle, abandoned vehicle, and immediate towing were printed in bold letters across the page. The tow driver was standing near the front bumper, waiting for the officer to tell him he could hook it. I remember the heat rising in my chest, but I also remember my father's voice in my head, "Do not give angry people the reaction they came to collect." So I did not yell. I did not step toward Carol. I did not touch the notice. I took out my phone and started recording the truck, the gravel pad, the tow truck, the police cruiser, and Carol standing on land she had no right to enter. A few weeks later, that same truck would still be sitting in the exact same place. The HOA would be forced to cancel every fine. The towing company would refuse any future call from Carol without legal proof of authority. A licensed surveyor would mark the boundary in bright orange stakes, and the sheriff's office would confirm what Carol should have checked before she ever picked up the phone: that pickup had never been on HOA property. Carol did not know it yet, but by calling the cops on my truck, she had brought witnesses to her own mistake. And if you have ever dealt with an HOA board member who thought their opinion was stronger than your deed, keep listening, because this story is not about a truck. It is about what happens when someone tries to enforce fake authority on real private land. That truck had been sitting on that gravel pad for years, long before Carol Whitman decided it offended the neighborhood. It was not new. I never pretended it was. The paint had faded from dark blue to something closer to storm gray. The tailgate had a dent from the time my father backed into a fence post while hauling lumber. The driver's seat had a tear in the vinyl, and the radio only worked when the weather was dry. But that old pickup started every winter, pulled what I needed it to pull, and carried more family history than any polished SUV in Carol's driveway. My father bought it used when I was still young enough to think every truck was indestructible. He used it to haul firewood, tools, fence posts, bags of concrete, and once my mother's old rocking chair when she refused to let movers touch it when he got sick. I drove him to appointments in that same truck because it sat higher than my car, and he could get in without hurting his knees. After he passed, I kept it running because letting it rust away felt like letting go of one more piece of him. So when the HOA started calling it a junk vehicle, I took that personally, even if I tried not to know it. My house sat at the edge of the subdivision, in that strange border area where neat lawns met older county parcels. When I bought the place, the closing documents included the house lot and a narrow side parcel that ran beside my shed. It was not fancy land, just a gravel pad, a strip of grass. Enough room to park the truck without blocking the driveway. But it was mine. It was listed in the deed, shown on the county map, and separated from the HOA-controlled area by a boundary most people never cared about. For years, nobody had a problem with it. The truck sat there through summer storms, fall leaves, Christmas lights, and spring mowing season. It did not leak oil. It was registered. It was insured. It moved often enough that no reasonable person could call it abandoned. I used it for home projects, hauling mulch, picking up lumber, and helping neighbors who needed something moved. In an older neighborhood, nobody would have looked twice at it. But Carol Whitman did not see a useful old truck. She saw disorder. Carol had joined the HOA board about a year before this happened, and almost immediately, the tone of the neighborhood changed. The old board had been annoying sometimes, but predictable. Carol made enforcement feel personal. She noticed trash cans left out too long, flags she did not like, planters that were the wrong color, and vehicles that did not match her idea of what a respectable street should look like. She used phrases like preserving property values and maintaining community image, but what she really meant was control. The first notice about my truck came by email. It claimed the pickup violated HOA parking rules, Because it appeared to be a commercial or abandoned vehicle visible from the street. I answered calmly. I explained that the truck was registered, insured, operational, and parked on private land outside the HOA's enforcement area. I attached a copy of the parcel map I had from closing and asked them to correct their records. Carol did not correct anything. The next email was colder. Then came a printed notice, then another. Each one sounded more certain than the last, as if repeating a false claim enough times could turn it into authority. The final warning said, I had 48 hours to remove the truck or face fines, enforcement action, and possible towing. I remember standing beside the pickup that evening, looking at the old dent in the tailgate and the gravel under my boots. The truck was not blocking anyone. It was not hurting anyone. It was simply sitting on land I owned, and somehow Carol had convinced herself that her dislike of it gave her power over it. That was when I started saving everything. Because I had lived long enough to know that people who overstep politely in writing often overstep badly in person, and Carol had just put her mistake on paper. The first red notice appeared on my windshield. 2 days after Carol's final warning email, I found it just after sunrise when I walked out with a cup of coffee in one hand and my work gloves in the other. The neighborhood was still quiet. The lawns were wet. A few sprinklers clicked in the distance. The old pickup sat exactly where it had sat for years, on the gravel pad beside my shed, with all 4 tires on land I owned. But now there was a bright red paper taped to the driver's side window. The notice had been placed high enough that I could see it from the porch. It was not tucked under the wiper like a normal reminder. It was taped flat to the glass, almost like whoever put it there wanted the whole street to notice before I did in big bold letters. It warned that the vehicle was in violation of HOA standards and subject to immediate towing. I stood there for a moment and looked at it without touching it. That was important. A younger version of me might have ripped it off, crumpled it up, and marched straight to Carol S.'s house. But by then, I understood what she was doing. She was trying to move the fight from paperwork into emotion. She wanted me angry. She wanted me reckless. She wanted me to give her a moment she could describe later as aggressive behavior. So I set my coffee down, took out my phone, and started recording. I filmed the notice from the porch. I filmed the gravel pad. I filmed the shed, the strip of grass, the road, the distance from the truck to the sidewalk, and the fact that the pickup was not blocking anything. Then, I walked closer and recorded the notice without removing it. The words commercial vehicle, abandoned vehicle, nuisance condition, and towing authorization were printed across the page like facts. Even though none of them were true, my truck was not abandoned. It was registered. It was insured. It ran. It had been driven 3 days earlier to pick up lumber. It was not a commercial vehicle just because it was old and had scratches in the bed. It was not parked in the street. It was not on HOA common property. It was sitting on a private side parcel that Carol had no authority over. But Carol had decided that if she repeated her version loudly enough, eventually, someone would treat it as official. That morning, I did not remove the notice until I had taken photographs from every angle. I saved the pictures, downloaded the video, and placed the paper in a folder. Then I sent one calm email to the HOA management company. I stated that the notice had been placed on a vehicle parked on private land outside HOA Enforcement Authority. I stated that no one from the HOA had permission to enter that parcel or attach anything to my vehicle. I asked them to preserve all communications related to the enforcement action. I did not expect Carol to appreciate that sentence. Preserve all communications has a way of changing the temperature in a room, even before lawyers are involved for 1 day. Nothing happened. Then came another email from the HOA. It claimed the board had received additional complaints and had authorized escalation if the truck was not removed. The email avoided answering the main issue. It did not address the parcel boundary. It did not address the deed. It did not address the fact that I was not asking permission to park on HOA land, because I was not parked on HOA land. Instead, it focused on appearance. The truck was visible from the street. The truck was inconsistent with community standards. The truck created a negative impression. The truck lowered the character of the neighborhood. That was when I realized Carol's argument had shifted. She could not prove ownership, so she was trying to make visibility sound like jurisdiction in her mind if she could see it. She could regulate it. That is a dangerous mindset in any HOA. The next few days were quiet in the way a house gets quiet before a storm. I still used the truck. I still kept it parked on the gravel pad. I kept my cameras running, saved every email, and checked the county map again to make sure I was not relying on memory. The parcel line was where I remembered it. The gravel pad was inside my property description. The HOA boundary stopped before it reached the place where my pickup sat. Then, on Friday morning, Carol came in. My front camera caught her before I saw her. She walked up from the sidewalk, carrying a folder and another red notice. She did not come to the porch. She went straight toward the truck. That mattered, because the truck was not in a public area. It was not on the curb. It was not in a shared driveway. To reach it, she had to step off the sidewalk, cross the strip of grass, and walk onto my gravel pad. I watched the camera feed from inside the house and felt my jaw tighten. She placed the second notice on the windshield, pressed the tape down with both hands, and stood back to look at it. Then she took a picture with her phone, as if she had completed an official inspection. She did not knock. She did not call. She did not ask permission. She simply treated my land as if her board position had opened a gate that did not exist. I did not run outside. I saved the footage. That decision became one of the most important choices I made in the whole story. Because when someone oversteps, the natural reaction is to confront them. But confrontation gives them noise. Video gives you sequence. It shows where they walked, what they touched, how long they stayed, and whether they had permission. Carol had created a record of her own trespass, and she did not even know it. By Monday, the fines started. The HOA sent a notice stating that daily fines would be assessed until the truck was removed from view. It also warned that towing could occur without further notice. I read that line several times, without further notice. They were now putting in writing that they believed they could remove a registered vehicle from private land without proving they had authority over that land. That was not enforcement. That was a threat with letterhead. I responded once more, still calmly. I included a copy of the parcel map and repeated that the vehicle was on my private property. I asked them to identify the recorded document giving the HOA enforcement rights over the gravel pad. I asked them to provide any easement, covenant, deed restriction, or boundary records supporting their claim. They did not send one. Instead, Carol escalated. I was in the kitchen rinsing out a coffee mug when I heard a heavy diesel engine outside at first. I thought it was a delivery truck. Then I saw the flashing lights reflect across the window above the sink. Blue first, then amber. I walked to the front door and saw the scene that would stay in my mind for a long time. A police cruiser was parked near the road. A tow truck idled behind it, its metal hook and wheel lift ready. Carol stood beside my pickup, wearing a crisp jacket and holding her folder like she was presenting evidence. The tow driver leaned against his truck, waiting. Two neighbors had slowed down on the sidewalk. One of them held a dog leash, but had stopped walking completely. For a moment, the whole thing felt unreal. My old truck. My father's truck was sitting on my gravel pad, exactly where it belonged, and somehow Carol had managed to bring police and a tow company to my house as if I were the one breaking the rules. I stepped outside slowly, with my phone already recording at my side. I did not raise my voice. I did not insult her. I did not accuse the officer of anything. I simply documented the scene as I walked down the driveway. I made sure the camera captured the truck, the gravel, the shed, the distance from the street, the tow truck, and Carol S.'s position on my land. The officer approached me in a calm, professional way. He was not there to take Carol S.'s side automatically, but he had clearly been told her version first. She had reported a vehicle violation, repeated refusal to comply with HOA rules, and a possible abandoned or commercial truck, creating a neighborhood nuisance. From the way she stood there, I could tell. She expected the officer to treat her HOA folder like a court order. I explained that the truck was registered, insured, operational, and parked on a private parcel outside HOA jurisdiction. I explained that the HOA had been notified in writing and had failed to produce any recorded authority over the land. I also explained that Carol had entered the property to tape notices to the vehicle. Carol's expression changed when I mentioned the camera footage. Not much, but enough. The tow driver began to look less comfortable too. Tow operators know there is a difference between removing a vehicle from a street under a valid authorization and taking one off private land where the person ordering the tow may not have rights. A bad tow can become expensive very quickly. Carol kept pushing. She held up the HOA paperwork and pointed toward the truck. She insisted it violated community standards because it was visible from the street. She acted as though visibility alone gave the board power. She made it sound like I was hiding behind a technicality by calling the gravel pad private land. That word, technicality, is one people use when the facts are inconvenient. Private land is not a technicality. A deed is not a loophole. A property line is not a suggestion. The officer asked whether I had documentation available. I told him I had my closing documents, parcel map, and tax records inside. I also had emails showing I had already notified the HOA that the truck was outside their boundary. He agreed to wait while I retrieved them. Carol did not like that. I could see the frustration on her face because the morning was not unfolding the way she had planned. She had expected embarrassment. She had expected the truck to be hooked quickly. She had expected me to either panic or lose my temper. Instead, everyone was standing still while documents entered the conversation. I brought out the folder I had already started building. It was not complete yet, but it was enough to slow things down. I showed the officer the parcel map from closing. I showed him the deed reference. I showed him the side parcel description. I showed him photos of the truck parked in the same location over time. I showed him the email where I had asked the HOA to provide authority and the fact that they had not answered that question. The officer reviewed the papers, then looked at the truck, then looked back at the gravel pad. That was the moment the energy shifted. He did not declare a final property ruling on the spot, because that was not his job. But he did tell the tow driver not to hook the vehicle until the ownership and authority issue was verified. He also made it clear that a civil HOA parking complaint did not automatically give anyone the right to remove a vehicle from disputed private property. For the first time that morning, Carol went quiet. The tow driver stepped back from my truck. That sound, or really the lack of sound, was one of the most satisfying moments of the entire ordeal. No chains, no wheel lift, no metal hook sliding under my father's old pickup, just a tow truck idling uselessly while Carol's confidence started to drain away in public. But the damage had already been done. She had called police to my home. She had brought a tow truck to my private land. She had taped notices to my vehicle. She had created a false enforcement record. She had tried to use the appearance of authority to pressure me into moving something she had no right to control. The officer documented the call thing. I asked for the incident number and wrote it down immediately. I also asked whether his body camera would show the interaction, the location of the vehicle, and the tow attempt. He said the report process could be requested later through the proper channel. That sentence went into my notes as soon as everyone left. Carol tried one last time before leaving. She suggested the truck would still have to be moved eventually because the board was not finished with the matter. She said it in the careful tone of someone trying not to sound threatening in front of a police officer. I did not answer her directly. I just kept recording. After the cruiser pulled away and the tow truck followed, the street slowly returned to normal. The neighbor with the dog finally continued walking. A garage door closed across the street. Somewhere down the block, a lawn crew started a mower. My truck stayed where it was. I stood beside it for a while and looked at the red notice, still stuck to the glass. The tape had started to wrinkle in the morning sun. My hands were steady by then, but my chest felt tight. Not because I was afraid of Carol, because I understood that she had crossed from annoying enforcement into something much more serious. This was not about a truck anymore. It was about whether an HOA board member could point at private property, call it a violation, and bring a tow truck before proving she had any authority at all that afternoon. I made copies of everything. The police incident number went into the folder, the videos went into a dated file, the red notices went into plastic sleeves, the emails were saved as PDFs. I wrote a timeline while the details were fresh. I noted who arrived, when they arrived, where they stood, what land they stepped onto, and what the tow driver was preparing to do. Then, I checked my security camera again. That was when I found the clip that changed the whole case. The camera had caught Carol arriving before the officer. It showed her stepping onto the gravel pad, walking around my truck, pointing out the vehicle to the tow operator, and gesturing toward the front wheels as if giving instructions. It also showed the tow truck backing partly toward the pad before the officer had even spoken to me. That meant Carol had not simply reported a concern and waited for law enforcement. She had arrived ready to remove the truck from private land without a court order, without proof of HOA authority, without even confirming the property line. I saved the clip in 3 places and watched it one more time. Carol had come to my house thinking she had finally cornered me, but what she had actually done was bring a police cruiser, a tow truck, a witness, and multiple cameras to the exact spot where her authority ended. If you have ever had an HOA or neighbor try to scare you into giving up a right you knew was yours, remember this part. The worst moment is often when the evidence begins. Do not just react. Record. Save, write down names. Keep the notices. Ask for the incident number, because when someone abuses authority, Their own actions can become the clearest proof against them. By sunset, my old pickup was still sitting on the gravel pad. The red notice was in my evidence folder, and Carol S.'s mistake was no longer just on paper, it was on camera. The morning after, Carol brought the police and the tow truck to my house. I woke up earlier than usual and stayed in bed for a few minutes, listening to the quiet. There was no diesel engine outside, no flashing blue light on the wall, no tow hook rattling near my father's old pickup, just the normal sounds of the house. The refrigerator humming in the kitchen, the heater turning on, and a few birds starting up in the trees near the side fence. For one peaceful minute, I could almost pretend nothing had happened. Then I remembered the red notices, the police incident number, the tow truck backing toward my gravel pad, and Carol standing beside my pickup as if she had every right to order it removed. That was when I got up and started building the file properly. I did not go to Carol S.'s house. I did not call the HOA board. I did not write an angry message in the neighborhood group. I did not threaten anyone. I had been around enough property disputes to know that anger may feel good in the moment, but paper wins the long fight. Carol had already given me the most valuable thing she could have given me, a public overreach recorded on camera with witnesses. Now I needed to make sure every piece was organized. I cleared the dining table and laid everything out. The red notices went on the left, the HOA emails went next to them. The parcel map from my closing documents went in the center. My vehicle registration, insurance card, and maintenance receipts went beside that. Then I opened my laptop and started pulling files from my security camera system. The first clip showed Carol arriving before the officer. She stepped from the sidewalk onto the grass, crossed the boundary area, and walked directly onto the gravel pad beside my shed. She circled the truck, looked through the windows, touched the windshield, and pressed the red notice onto the glass. She did not knock on my door. She did not ask permission. She acted like my land was a hallway inside the HOA office. The second clip showed the tow truck arriving. That was the one that made my stomach tighten all over again. The driver did not hook the truck, but he positioned himself like he was preparing to. Carol pointed toward the front of my pickup and then toward the gravel pad, giving the impression that she was directing the process before the officer had fully reviewed the situation. The third clip showed the police cruiser arriving. The officer handled himself professionally, but the footage still mattered because it showed the scene exactly as it happened. My truck on the gravel pad, the tow truck waiting nearby, Carol standing on the edge of my property, and me walking out calmly with my phone recording. I saved every clip in 3 places. Then I wrote a timeline, not a story, not a complaint, a timeline: date of the first HOA email, date of my reply, date of the first red notice, date Carol entered the gravel pad, date the daily fine letter arrived, time the tow truck arrived, time the officer arrived, time I retrieved my documents, time the tow driver stepped away from the truck, police incident number, names. I knew vehicle descriptions, weather conditions, camera file names. It may sound boring, but boring is useful. Boring is what makes a file easy for a lawyer, sheriff, county clerk, or insurance company to understand. People like Carol thrive in confusion. They talk fast, act certain, and hope nobody slows down long enough to check the foundation of their claim. My job was to slow everything down. After the timeline, I opened the thick folder from when I bought the house. I had not looked at those closing documents in years. Most homeowners know they are important, but after the purchase is done, the papers usually end up in a drawer or a closet. Mine were still in a banker's box with old tax records, title insurance documents, the survey from the closing, and the deed description. The survey was the first thing I pulled out. There it was, the parcel shown in plain lines and measurements. The gravel pad was not part of the HOA common area. It was not part of the street. It was not an easement for parking enforcement. It was a narrow private strip attached to my property running beside the shed. The line separating it from the HOA-controlled area was not where Carol seemed to believe it was. It sat several feet away from the truck. I took a high-resolution scan of the survey and saved it to the evidence folder. Then I pulled the deed. The language was dry, but it mattered. The parcel description matched the survey. The title policy did not show any HOA parking enforcement right over that side strip. There were no recorded documents giving the HOA permission to enter the gravel pad, place notices on vehicles, or authorize towing from that area. That was the first real confirmation that Carol had not just made a judgment error. She had acted without the legal authority she claimed to have. Still, I did not want to rely only on my closing packet. A private copy is helpful, but public records are stronger. So that morning I drove to the county recorder's office. I took the long way because I wanted to clear my head before walking in. I remember thinking about my father and that truck. He had always told me that the only thing more important than owning something was being able to prove you owned it. At the time, I thought he was being old-fashioned after Carol brought a tow truck to my house. His advice felt more modern than anything the HOA had ever written. At the county office, I asked for the recorded deed, the parcel map, and any recorded restrictions or easements affecting the side parcel. I did not ask the clerk to take my side. I did not complain about Carol. I simply asked for records. That distinction was important. County employees are not there to referee personal arguments, but records are records. The clerk pulled the documents. The county parcel map showed the same thing my closing survey showed. The gravel pad was inside my property boundary. The side parcel was separately described. The HOA boundary did not cover the spot where the truck sat. There was no recorded right for the HOA to regulate that parking area as common property. I paid for certified copies. That small decision mattered. A photocopy can be questioned. A screenshot can be dismissed. A certified county record has a different weight. It says the information is not my opinion. It is in the public record. After that, I went to the county assessor's office and confirmed the tax parcel information. The gravel pad and side strip were part of my assessed property. I had been paying taxes on that land. Carol had never paid taxes on it. The HOA had never maintained it. The association had never repaired the gravel, cleared the leaves, or insured that little piece of ground. Yet Carol had tried to enforce rules there as if it belonged to her board. When I got home, I placed the certified records in plastic sleeves and added them to the binder. Then I checked the HOA documents. This was the part I knew Carol would lean on, so I read carefully. There were parking restrictions in the HOA rules. There were rules about commercial vehicles, inoperable vehicles, trailers, and vehicles visible from the street. But those rules applied to lots inside the HOA and areas under association control. They did not magically expand over land outside the recorded boundary. That was the heart of the issue. Carol had confused visibility with jurisdiction. She could see my truck, so she believed she could control it, but property law does not work that way. Seeing something from the street does not give an HOA ownership. Disliking something does not create an easement. Calling something ugly does not make it abandoned. A board vote cannot reach across a boundary line and turn private land into association property. Next, I checked county code. I wanted to make sure Carol could not shift her argument from HOA rules to public nuisance. The truck was registered. The plates were current. Insurance was active. The tires were inflated. It was not leaking fluids. It was not blocking a sidewalk, street, driveway, fire lane, or public right-of-way. It was not dismantled. It was not a safety hazard. By the county's own standards, there was no obvious abandoned vehicle issue. I printed those code sections and added them to the binder too. Then I called a real estate attorney. I did not call because I wanted a dramatic lawsuit. I called because I wanted to avoid making a mistake when someone has already tried to tow your vehicle from your land. Every next step matters. One angry email can distract from the facts. One careless statement can be quoted out of context. One confrontation at the property line can turn a clean case into a messy one. The attorney listened to the summary, reviewed the documents I emailed, and gave me a simple path forward. Keep all communication in writing. Do not move the truck just to satisfy the HOA. Do not block access to the area in a way that could create a separate issue. Do not confront Carol personally. Request body cam and incident records through the proper process. Hire a licensed surveyor to mark the boundary on the ground. Send a formal notice only after the file is complete. That advice fit exactly what my father would have respected. Do the work first. Speak second. So I hired a licensed surveyor. I chose one who had experience with residential boundary disputes and small parcel lines near HOA communities. I sent him the deed, county parcel map, closing survey, and photographs of the gravel pad. I explained that the dispute involved a truck parked on a side parcel and an HOA attempting to tow it as if it were under association control. He came out a few days later. Carol must have noticed because her curtains moved across the street while the surveyor set up his equipment. I did not wave. I did not smile. I simply stood back and let him work. He located the reference points, checked the measurements, compared the recorded documents, and walked the line between the HOA-controlled area and my side parcel. Then the orange stakes went into the ground, one near the front corner of the gravel pad, one near the strip of grass, one just beyond the rear bumper of the truck. The line was so clear that even a person who did not understand deeds could understand the picture. The truck sat entirely on my side, not close enough to call it shared, not sitting halfway across a boundary, not touching common area, entirely on my private land. I took photos from every angle. The truck with the stakes, the truck with the shed, the truck with the street in the background, the truck with the property line visible. I took wide shots and close shots. I made sure the images showed that the HOA would have to cross onto my property to touch the vehicle. That afternoon, I checked the camera footage again, and that was when I noticed something I had missed the first time. Carol had not only placed notices on my truck. On one clip, she appeared to test the door handle. It was a small motion, quick enough that I had overlooked it when I was focused on the tow truck, but slowed down. It was clear. She stepped close, reached toward the driver's side handle, and pulled once before placing the paper on the windshield. That changed the feeling in the room. A notice on a windshield was bad enough. Entering the land was bad enough, but touching the door handle made the whole thing feel even more invasive. She had not simply complained about the truck. She had treated it as if she had a right to inspect it. I saved that clip separately and marked the timestamp. By the end of the week, my binder had become a clean, serious file. It contained certified county records, the deed, the closing survey, the new surveyor's field notes, photographs of the orange stakes, HOA emails, red notices, camera footage summaries, vehicle registration, insurance proof, county code printouts, the police incident number, and a written timeline. Only then did my attorney prepare the first formal letter. The letter did not shout. It did not insult Carol. It did not accuse the HOA of every possible wrong under the sun. It did what good legal letters do. It stated the facts clearly and made the risk impossible to ignore. The truck was parked on private land. The HOA had been notified of that fact. The HOA had not produced any recorded authority over the parcel. Carol had entered the property and placed notices on the vehicle. A tow truck had been called to remove a vehicle from land outside HOA jurisdiction. The survey confirmed the boundary. The county records supported ownership. Any further attempt to tow, fine, or enter the property could create additional liability. For the first time, the HOA stopped sending daily fines. That silence told me they had finally started reading more carefully. But the strongest moment came 2 days later, when the towing company responded through their own office. They wanted a clarification from the HOA before accepting any future tow request from Carol. They wanted proof that the HOA had legal authority over the exact location of the truck. They did not want to be pulled into a wrongful tow claim because one board member had confused community standards with private property rights. That was when I knew the pressure had shifted. Carol had started with confidence, a red notice, a police call, and a tow truck. I had answered with a camera, a deed, a county map, a survey, and a paper trail. And if you are watching this while dealing with an HOA that keeps acting like your patience is weakness, remember what happened here. The turning point was not the morning the police arrived. The turning point was the morning after, when I decided not to fight Carol on her terms. I did not chase drama. I built proof because once the orange survey stakes went into the ground, Carol's opinion stopped being the center of the story. The property line took over. When my attorney finished reviewing the file, he did not sound surprised. That may have been the most comforting part. To me, the whole situation still felt outrageous, like something that should have been impossible in a neighborhood where everyone had deeds, maps, and property lines. But to him, it had a familiar shape. An HOA board member had mistaken control for ownership. A complaint had been dressed up as enforcement, and a private citizen had been pressured to give up a right simply because someone with a title on a committee wanted him to. The legal issue was clearer than Carol wanted it to be. The truck was registered, it was insured, it ran, it was not blocking traffic, it was not sitting in a public right-of-way, it was not leaking fluids, it was not abandoned under county code. And most importantly, it was not parked on HOA property. That last fact was the one everything turned on. The HOA could have opinions about what looked nice from the street. Carol could dislike the faded paint, the dented tailgate, and the way an older work truck looked next to her polished landscaping. Residents could complain that it did not match the image they wanted for the neighborhood, but none of that created legal authority over land outside the HOA boundary. Visibility was not jurisdiction. That became the core of the demand letter. My attorney wrote it in the kind of plain language that makes people uncomfortable because it leaves very little room for performance. The letter identified the property, the side parcel, the gravel pad, and the location of the truck. It referenced the deed, the certified county parcel map, the closing survey, and the new surveyor's findings. It explained that the vehicle was located entirely on my private land, and that the HOA had not produced any recorded covenant, easement, restriction, or ownership interest allowing it to enforce parking rules there. Then the letter moved through the timeline. The HOA had sent violation notices after being informed the vehicle was outside its jurisdiction. Carol had entered the property without permission. Red notices had been attached to the truck. Daily fines had been threatened. A tow truck had been called. Police had been summoned to support an enforcement action that the documents did not justify. The towing attempt had been stopped only because the officer paused long enough to review the property issue. The letter did not need to exaggerate. The facts were enough. It demanded that the HOA immediately cancel every violation, remove all fines, correct any internal enforcement record, and provide written confirmation that it would not attempt to tow, tag, enter, inspect, or otherwise interfere with vehicles or property located on the side parcel. It also demanded reimbursement for the survey, attorney review, certified county records, and any costs caused by the improper enforcement attempt. Then came the part that changed the tone completely. The letter instructed the HOA, the management company, Carol, and the towing company to preserve all records connected to the matter: emails, text messages, board minutes, enforcement notes, photographs, tow authorization forms, phone logs, any communications discussing my truck, my property, the gravel pad, or the decision to call law enforcement. That sentence mattered because it took the issue out of Carol's hands. She could no longer treat the dispute like a neighborhood argument. She could win by sounding confident. Once preservation of records was requested, every message became something that might be read later by an attorney, an insurance adjuster, a judge, or the HOA's own residents. People get very careful when they realize the story they told in private may have to survive in public. The letter went to the HOA management company first, then to the board, then to the towing company. A copy was also prepared for the officer's incident file and the sheriff's office if the HOA tried to escalate again. For the first time since the red notices began, the daily fine emails stopped. No explanation, no apology, just silence. But silence from the HOA did not mean nothing was happening. It meant the problem had moved behind closed doors, where people who had actual responsibility were finally reading the documents Carol had ignored. The towing company responded before the HOA did. That was smart on their part. A towing company can get dragged into serious trouble if it removes a vehicle without valid authority. When the location is a public street, there are procedures. When it is clearly private property controlled by the person requesting the tow, there are procedures. But when a third party tries to tow a registered vehicle from someone else's private land, everything changes. The company's response was careful. They did not admit fault, but they confirmed they would not accept any future tow request from the HOA for that location without written proof of legal authority over the exact parcel. They also requested clarification from the HOA about who had represented that the truck was subject to association enforcement. That was a quiet but powerful shift. Carol had called the tow truck as if the company were a tool she could use. Now, the company was protecting itself from Carol. The management company responded next. Their message was more formal than anything I had received before. They requested the survey report, the certified parcel map, and the attorney's supporting documents. They said the matter was under review. They said enforcement would be paused while property boundaries were evaluated. Paused. That word told me they still did not want to admit they were wrong, but it also told me they knew they could not keep pushing forward without risk. My attorney sent the documents again, this time with the surveyor's map marked clearly. The orange stakes in the photographs made the issue easy to understand. The truck sat entirely on my side of the line. To touch it, Carol had to enter my land. To tow it, the company would have had to remove it from my land. To enforce against it, the HOA would have needed authority it did not have. The whole case became almost painfully simple. Carol had enforced across the wrong line. Behind the scenes, the HOA board began asking questions Carol should have asked before any of this happened. Who approved the tow call? Who authorized daily fines after I disputed jurisdiction? Who reviewed the property boundary? Was there a legal opinion? Did the board vote on this specific enforcement action? Did the HOA have any recorded document covering the side parcel? The answers were not good for Carol. There had been no real legal review. There had been no survey before enforcement. There had been no recorded authority over the gravel pad. The management company had relied on information provided by Carol and the enforcement committee. The tow request had been made, as if the truck were located inside HOA-controlled property. The fines had continued even after I raised the boundary issue in writing. That mattered, because mistakes happen. A reasonable board can receive a complaint, send a notice, and then stop when the owner provides documents showing the HOA has no authority. That is an error corrected by facts, but continuing to threaten fines and towing after being told about the boundary starts to look different. It starts to look less like confusion and more like overreach. Carol tried to save her position by changing the argument again. Through the board, she suggested that even if the gravel pad was private land, the truck was visible from the street and therefore affected the community. That argument may have sounded persuasive to people who think HOA rules are stronger than they really are, but my attorney answered it directly. The HOA's appearance standards could not be enforced on land outside its recorded jurisdiction simply because something was visible. If that were true, an HOA could regulate a farmer's barn across the road, a neighbor's old tractor beyond a fence, or a parked vehicle on a separate county parcel. That is not how property rights work. Then Carol leaned on the phrase community standards. That phrase had carried her for months. It sounded reasonable, it sounded responsible. It sounded like something good neighbors should care about. But community standards do not erase a deed. They do not extend a boundary. They do not authorize trespass. They do not turn an old pickup into an abandoned vehicle. They do not give a board member the right to call a tow truck onto land the HOA does not own. The more she tried to justify the enforcement, the smaller her argument became. The strongest moment of the legal turn came when the sheriff's incident report was added to the file. It showed that the police had been called to a dispute involving a vehicle on private property, and that the tow was not allowed to proceed once the property authority issue was raised. The report did not need dramatic language. It simply confirmed that Carol's attempt had been interrupted by the exact question she had hoped no one would ask: whose land was the truck on? Once that question was answered, everything else followed. The county records answered it, the survey answered it, the tax records answered it, the deed answered it, the camera footage answered it. Even the photographs of Carol walking across the gravel pad answered it. At that point, the HOA had a choice. They could admit the boundary issue and limit their damage, or they could continue defending Carol and risk turning one bad enforcement attempt into a larger legal claim. Their insurance carrier helped them make the smarter choice. Insurance companies do not care about Carol's pride. They do not care whether a truck looks nice from the street. They care about liability. And once they saw the demand letter, the survey, the tow attempt, the camera footage, and the lack of recorded authority, they understood the risk. A wrongful tow would have been costly. Trespass claims could be costly. Continuing enforcement after notice could be worse. And if residents discovered that HOA funds were being used to defend a board member's personal crusade against a truck on private land, the board would have another problem inside the neighborhood. That was when the first settlement conversation started. I want to be clear about something. I was not looking for a windfall. I did not want to turn my father's truck into a lottery ticket. I wanted the HOA to stop, correct the record, pay for the costs they forced me to incur, and admit in writing that the gravel pad was outside their enforcement area. That was all. But getting even that required pressure, because people like Carol do not apologize just because they are wrong. They apologize only when remaining wrong becomes more expensive than stopping. The final proof came from the surveyor's signed boundary statement. It confirmed that the truck was parked entirely within my property line, several feet from the HOA-controlled area. The document included the location of the stakes, the measurements, and the references used to verify the line. Once that was in hand, my attorney sent one final notice before escalation. The message was simple. If the HOA did not cancel the violations, remove the fines, and provide written assurance against further enforcement on the side parcel, we would move forward with formal claims for trespass, wrongful enforcement, interference with property rights, and recovery of costs. That was the sentence that finally broke the wall. A week earlier, Carol had been standing beside my truck with police lights flashing and a tow driver waiting. Now the HOA was discussing how to undo what she had done. The fines were suspended first, then the violation record was marked for review. Then the management company requested a closed session with the board. Then, residents began hearing rumors that the truck issue had turned into a legal problem. Carol, who had once seemed pleased to make an example out of me, suddenly had to explain why her example might cost everyone money. And that is where the power shifted completely. Carol's authority had depended on people assuming she knew what she was doing. The moment the documents proved she did not, her confidence became evidence against her. Every notice she sent, every email she ignored, every step she took onto the gravel pad, and every instruction she gave near that tow truck showed the same pattern. She acted first, claimed authority second, and checked the property line last. By then, checking was too late. If you are listening to this and you own property near an HOA, remember this part carefully. The line you can prove is the line that protects you, not the line your neighbor remembers, not the line the board assumes, not the line someone wishes were true because it would make enforcement easier. The line in the deed, the county map, the survey, and the public record is the line that matters. Carol had started with a red notice. I answered with the record, and once the record was complete, the question was no longer whether my old pickup violated her standards. The question was why an HOA board member had called the cops on a truck parked on land that never belonged to her. The day everyone came back to look at the truck, I already knew the answer. The deed knew it, the county map knew it, the surveyor's stakes knew it, my cameras knew it, even the gravel under the tires knew it. If land could talk. But there is something different about watching other people finally see what you have been trying to prove all along. It was a clear morning, cool enough that the air still had a little bite to it, but bright enough for every orange survey stake to stand out along the side parcel. My old pickup sat where it always had, beside the shed, all 4 tires on the gravel pad. The paint was still faded. The tailgate was still dented. It still looked like a working truck instead of something that belonged in a luxury brochure. But that morning, it also looked like evidence. The sheriff's deputy arrived first. He was not the same officer from the first call, but he had the report, the incident number, and the notes from the morning Carol brought the tow truck. He parked on the street and walked up slowly, looking first at the truck, then at the orange stakes, then at the strip of grass separating the gravel pad from the HOA-controlled area. The county surveyor arrived next with a copy of the marked boundary map. My attorney came a few minutes later, carrying a folder that looked almost too plain for how much trouble it represented. Then came the HOA management representative, followed by a towing company supervisor. Carol arrived last, wearing the same polished expression she always wore when she thought formality could replace facts. But this time, she did not have the advantage of surprise. There was no tow hook moving toward my bumper, no red notice freshly taped to the windshield, no crowd of neighbors watching me get embarrassed before I could gather my documents. There was only the property line marked clearly in the ground, and a file full of records that all said the same thing. The surveyor explained the boundary first. He pointed to the stakes one by one, then to the map, then to the truck. The line was not complicated. It did not run under the truck. It did not cut through the gravel pad. It did not create some uncertain gray area. The truck was several feet inside my private parcel. The sheriff's deputy reviewed the situation carefully. He was calm, but the meaning of his words was firm, without a court order. Ownership interest or valid legal authority over that parcel. The HOA could not simply order a vehicle removed from my land. A neighborhood rule did not become a towing right just because someone from the board wanted it enforced. Carol tried to hold her ground. She kept pointing toward the street, toward the truck, toward the houses across the way, as if visibility itself was still her strongest argument. But the more she leaned on appearance, the weaker her position became. The surveyor was not there to judge curb appeal. The deputy was not there to decide whether the truck matched the neighborhood image. My attorney was not there to debate Carol's taste. They were there to answer one question: whose land was the truck parked on? And by that point, the answer had become impossible to avoid. The towing company supervisor looked especially serious. He studied the survey map, then looked at Carol, then looked back at the truck. His company had come very close to removing a registered, insured vehicle from private land, based on Carol's representation that the HOA had authority. Now he could see that the authority had never been verified. He made it clear that his company would not accept another tow request for that location without written legal proof. Not a board member's complaint, not an email, not an HOA notice, and not a claim about community standards. That was the moment Carol's confidence finally began to break. Not loudly, not dramatically. It just drained out of her face a little at a time. The management representative asked whether there was any recorded HOA restriction covering the side parcel. My attorney handed over the county records. The answer was no. The representative asked whether the truck violated county abandoned vehicle rules. The deputy and the documents showed that it did not. The representative Asked whether the truck blocked public access. It did not. Whether it was in a right-of-way, it was not. Whether it sat on common area, it did not. Each question closed another door. Carol had called the cops because she thought the truck was ugly. But ugly is not illegal. Old is not abandoned, visible is not public, and private land does not stop being private because a board member dislikes what is parked there. The sheriff's deputy documented the site visit. The surveyor's map went into the file. The towing company noted that no tow would proceed. My attorney requested written confirmation from the HOA that all enforcement on the side parcel would stop. The management representative did not look happy, but she looked realistic. She understood what Carol still seemed to be resisting. The HOA had overreached. A few days later, the issue came before the HOA board in a meeting that Carol clearly did not want to have. I did not attend to argue. I attended because my property had been targeted. My truck had nearly been towed, and the people paying dues deserved to know how close their board had come to creating a much larger legal problem. The room felt different from the moment I walked in before. Carol had controlled the story. She had painted me as stubborn, careless, and disrespectful of the community. But by then, residents had heard enough to start asking practical questions. Who authorized the tow call? Why were fines sent after I disputed jurisdiction? Why did no one order a survey first? Why did the board risk association money over land the HOA did not own? Those questions were more damaging than anger would have been. Carol tried to soften everything. She framed it as a misunderstanding, an effort to preserve property values, a routine enforcement action that became more complicated than expected. But the documents did not support that version. A misunderstanding ends when the owner sends the parcel map. A good faith mistake stops when the boundary is questioned. What Carol had done was continue escalating until police and a tow truck stood beside my vehicle. The management company had to admit that enforcement procedures had failed. The board had to acknowledge that no recorded authority had been found for the side parcel. The towing company's refusal to act without legal proof was read into the discussion. My attorney's letter was referenced. The surveyor's findings were summarized. For once, Carol had to sit quietly while facts moved around the room without asking her permission. That was the most satisfying part of the entire process. Not seeing her embarrassed, not watching her lose control of the meeting. It was watching the truth become orderly enough that nobody could shove it back into confusion. The board voted to suspend the violations immediately while final corrective action was prepared. Then, under pressure from residents, they agreed to remove the fines from my account, correct the enforcement record, and review Carol's conduct as chair of the enforcement committee. They also agreed that no future action would be taken near disputed property lines without county records. Survey confirmation and legal review. Carol stared at the table while that vote passed. The same woman who had stood beside my truck with a tow truck waiting now had to listen, while her own board admitted the HOA had no authority over the gravel pad. Her folder of complaints could not save her. Her concern about property values could not save her. Her polished tone could not save her. The property line had done what I never could have done by shouting it ended the argument. When I got home from that meeting, the truck was still sitting under the evening light, exactly where it had been the whole time. For the first time in weeks, I looked at it without feeling that tightness in my chest. It was still old, still dented, still imperfect, but it was mine, on land that was mine, protected by records Carol should have respected before she ever called anyone. And if you have ever had someone try to make you feel unreasonable for defending what belongs to you, remember this part. The goal is not to win the loudest moment. The goal is to create a record strong enough that the truth can stand without you holding it up. Carol brought a tow truck, I brought the survey, and the survey stayed. The final letter from the HOA arrived almost 3 weeks after Carol called the police on my truck. It was short, formal, and carefully worded. There was no real apology in it. Not the kind a decent person gives when they know they crossed a line. But it did confirm the only thing I needed in writing. The HOA was canceling all violations connected to my pickup. The fines were removed. The enforcement record was corrected, and the board acknowledged that the gravel pad beside my shed was not part of the HOA's enforcement area. My truck had not moved an inch. That mattered to me more than Carol ever understood. I did not keep it there to provoke her. I kept it there because moving it after her threats would have taught the wrong lesson. It would have told her that if she pushed hard enough, called enough people, and made enough noise, she could force a private property owner to surrender something she had no right to touch. The HOA reimbursed the cost of the survey, the certified county records, and part of my attorney's fees. The towing company changed its policy for that neighborhood and refused to respond to any future HOA tow request without written proof of authority over the exact location of the vehicle. That alone probably saved some other homeowner from going through the same thing. Carol paid the highest price in the one place she cared about most, the boardroom. Residents started asking questions she could not answer cleanly. Why had she kept pushing after I sent the parcel map? Why had she called a tow truck before verifying the boundary? Why had the HOA risked everyone's dues over one old pickup parked on land the association did not own? The board removed her from the enforcement committee first. Not long after that, she resigned from her position entirely. The HOA also rewrote its enforcement process. No more towing threats near disputed property lines without a survey. No more fines on parcels outside the recorded HOA boundary. No more relying on one board member's opinion when ownership records could be checked at the county office. As for me, I put up one small sign beside the gravel pad. Nothing rude, nothing dramatic, just a plain metal sign that said, "Private property, county survey on file, the truck is still there. The paint is still faded. The tailgate still has the dent my father left in it. Every time I see it, I remember how close Carol came to having it dragged away because she thought confidence was the same as authority. But she was wrong. I did not win because I yelled louder. I did not win because I embarrassed her online or tried to play dirty. I won because I stayed calm, kept the notices, saved the camera footage, checked the deed, hired surveyor, and let the property line speak for itself. So, if an HOA, a neighbor, or anyone else ever tries to tell you that your rights disappear because your property bothers them, do not give them the reaction they are hoping for. Get the records, save the proof, know your line, because sometimes the strongest thing you can do is stand quietly on land that is already yours. And if this story reminded you of someone who crossed the line, share your thoughts in the comments, save this video for later, and subscribe for more stories where ordinary people use facts, patience, and the law to get the last word.